Hi, I'm Jasma. Let's make one of the most traditional desserts for the Lunar New Year, 8 treasure sticky rice. This is incredibly simple to make. If you're capable of cooking rice, that's pretty much all the skill set you'll need. Now, the foods made during the Lunar New Year often have symbolic and superstitious intentions behind it, and this dish specifically represents the abundance of prosperity because we're using 8 different treasures, which are the fillings inside of the rice, and also the number 8 itself is considered very lucky because in Chinese it phonetically sounds very similar to the word prosper. First, let's talk about the rice. This dish isn't just made with regular rice because it requires the sticky properties of glutinous rice in order to hold the final shape of the rice pudding and also be able to stick together the 8 treasures that we're putting inside. There are 2 variations to glutinous rice, the long grain and short grain. The short grain one is a little rounder. It's known as sweet rice. It has a sweeter flavor and it's also chewier in texture. Though for the purposes of this dish, it's recommended to use the long grain rice simply because it is stickier, so it kind of makes it easier to shape the final rice pudding. Though for my version of this dish, I'm using a purple rice, also known as a black glutinous rice. If you can't get your hands on this, you can make a blend using black jasmine rice with the white glutinous rice. You can use a 2-to-1 or half and half ratio. It's completely up to your own preference. Begin by washing your rice and draining away any excess water so that we have more control over the moisture content. And just add all of that into your Instant Pot or rice cooker. You can use any sort of pressure cooker or even just a regular rice cooker. This just speeds things up a little bit. Then add the water, which is going to soak and cook the rice, which is why we washed and rinsed it separately. This way we can avoid changing the water out multiple times and retain more of the color and nutrients of the rice. Also add in the brown sugar, which is going to sweeten the rice. We're adding it at this point so that it's more evenly distributed and it's just easier to combine now compared to once the rice is actually cooked. The 8 treasure rice is eaten as a dessert, so it's supposed to be sweetened, but considering we're using a lot of dried berries and traditionally even candied fruits are used in the filling, you can reduce the amount of brown sugar even more to resort to more natural sources of sugar. Now just let this soak for 1 hour to hydrate the rice and make it easier to cook. You can also prepare this far in advance. Then once the rice is done soaking, cook it on high pressure for around 30 minutes. While the rice is cooking and waiting for natural release, we're going to prep the fillings, which are the treasures in this dish. All the ingredients I'm using as the filling I think pair really well with each other in terms of sweetness and texture, and they also complement the flavor of the rice. You can use anything you want, just be careful to not go overboard and keep in mind how they would taste all together. For some of my dried fruits, I'm soaking in warm water so that they can soften up before mixing in with the rest of the rice, and just drain away the water after a couple minutes. I'm also briefly chopping up my pecans just so they're in smaller chunks. For the dates, depending on the kind that you purchased, you might need to rehydrate them. I just had to give it a light rinse. And then I've removed the pits of each date using my knife. You kind of just want to cut around it, be really careful here, but it really shouldn't be that difficult. And then I just chop the amount I'm using in the filling into smaller chunks. I have a lot of dried dates here because I'm using some for the filling and some as the decor for the exterior of the rice. The rice is cooked, the pressure has been naturally released, and while it's still warm, you want to mix in all of the filling so it's a lot easier to do. When you're mixing the rice, try and be careful so that you're not mashing up the rice and breaking up the grains. This way they're still nice and prominent in the final dish. To shape and assemble the rice, normally you would just make one large portion and it kind of gets shared with everybody, but I'm making mini versions of it. So I'm using these smaller bowls and it makes for individual servings of the 8 treasure rice pudding. You can also use any sort of molds. I've seen people make this in bundt cake pans, which I think is pretty cool. And to ensure that we can actually get the rice out, take a brush, grab some coconut oil and just grease the insides of each bowl. I find it easier to use coconut oil that hasn't been melted so it kind of sticks better to the bowl. Then to decorate the bottom of the bowls, which will become the surface of the rice, I made some red date flowers. You basically just use each pitted date as one petal on the flower, make sure they're all overlapping, and then just squeeze it super tightly together so it doesn't fall apart. And once you have something like this, cut it in half or into thirds. Make a bunch of these varying in size. Arrange 2 or 3 of these flowers onto the bottom of each greased bowl, then sprinkle in some extra toppings. I did goji berries, pumpkin seeds, and pecans, and just played around with them until they looked a little something like this. Scoop on the rice and be careful not to move around the pattern you just created, and press this down really tightly. For the last treasure, I have these whole roasted chestnuts, and I just placed the entire thing into the middle and covered it up with more rice. Pack everything down super tightly. This is crucial for the rice to hold its shape and also so the toppings don't fall apart. Put a plate over the bowl, flip it over, and remove the bowl to reveal the final mound of rice. If the rice is still warm and you grease the bowl well enough, this should be very simple, but if the rice is stuck, you can grab a spatula and just run it around the edges to help it out. And that's all with the 8 treasure sticky rice. This is best eaten warm. Definitely do not eat it super cold because it will upset your stomach. And if you made a big batch of this, you can freeze it, defrost it in the fridge before you intend to eat it, and steam it to reheat it. Though this is a Chinese New Year delicacy, you can absolutely eat it whenever you want. It makes for a really great breakfast because it's super filling and it has a lot of nutritious ingredients. I hope you give it a try, and thanks for watching.